It should move on from identity politics. It's not working. Or for us, Democrats are hemorrhaging the very voters they think they're pandering to. The Financial Times writes, Democrats are going backwards faster with voters of color than any other demographic, and suggests the reason is that a less racially divided America is an America where people vote more based on their beliefs than their identity. Exactly. Far-left liberals are living in an old paradigm. Americans don't fit into neat little boxes anymore. You're still building your politics around slicing and dicing people into these fixed categories. Democrats need to get the memo that you can't win elections anymore by automatically assuming you're going to get every voter who's not these guys.
Bill Maher is raising concerns, arguing that the DNC may be growing increasingly disconnected from many everyday Americans as midterm elections approach, and even after recent Democratic victories, he suggests deeper challenges remain. On Real Time with Bill Maher, he criticized party leaders over the direction of certain policies. He argues they overlook what he views as core American principles. As always, remember to subscribe for coverage.
To your point, I want to get to something very important. How many know what SAM stands for? It's a new phrase. It stands for Speaking with American Men, SAM. This is the new movement by the Democratic Party. They lost the men vote a lot last time, so they had a meeting up at the Ritz-Carlton at Half Moon Bay, south of San Francisco. I'm not making this up, where they served mini lobster rolls and had heirloom tomato carpaccio and seared sea bass in their conclave to decide how to win back the American man. Now, look.
It's because we used to have conferences at Harvard to figure out what the working class needs, and so now we're moving west.
You got to own who you are. I get it. These are the mini lobster roll people.
Recent elections signaled potential challenges for Democrats, particularly when it comes to male voters. They saw a noticeable decline in support for men, and the underlying causes are drawing increased attention. Some men say they feel the party's messaging frames them as ineffective, unnecessary, or unable to succeed independently. That perception has contributed to frustration and a sense of distance. Rather than remaining quiet, some of those concerns appear to influence voting decisions. In response, Democratic leaders have launched conversations and outreach initiatives aimed at rebuilding trust with male voters. The key issue now is whether they fully grasp the concerns being raised. Elections are shaped not only by policy positions, but also by how individuals feel seen and valued. When voters sense that recognition is missing, they tend to respond accordingly.
They had this symposium, and we got a hold of what was this is Speaking with American Men. This is a real thing that they're doing, and they have these seminars. Would you like to hear what was said? Okay. These are ways that they want to seminars that they had to try to win back the typical American male, like how to keep your liberal base while putting guns on your Christmas card. That was one that they wanted to. Best protein powder for a clean bulk, and other dude conversation starters. Bud Light etiquette, when to drink it, when to shoot it. Fishing, the bizarre hobby working class men enjoy instead of pickleball.
These messaging strategies are noteworthy, but if Democrats view them as the key to regaining support from men, they may be misjudging the broader mood. Most men are not preoccupied with niche cultural debates or surface-level lifestyle trends. Their concerns tend to be practical and immediate. Many are focused on stable employment, increasing living costs, housing payments, and whether their families feel secure in their neighborhoods. They value the sense of purpose that comes from contributing, safeguarding loved ones, and being recognized for fulfilling those responsibilities. What some object to is the perception of being simplified into a stereotype, depicted as uninformed, harmful, or constantly in need of correction. That portrayal does not align with how many men see themselves, as diligent, accountable, and committed to supporting their families. They are not seeking praise, they are seeking basic respect, an acknowledgement of their pressures, duties, and identity without feeling that these qualities must be diminished or apologized for in public conversations today.
The only scene that you're obsessed with in Titanic, hint, it has tits. Bruce Lee versus Bigfoot, mythical fight scenarios to man up your Joe Rogan appearance. Intersectionality and the importance of shutting the fuck up about it. And undouching your face, man beards from Ted Cruz to J.D. Vance.
You can notice the subtle expression on Maher's face, the kind that communicates more than a direct statement. It suggests skepticism about how aligned the DNC is with the day-to-day experiences many men describe. This conversation is not centered on image, bravado, or exaggerated displays of toughness. It is centered on stability. It reflects concerns about direction, purpose, and feeling recognized in a culture where some men believe their efforts are increasingly overlooked. Maher appears to suggest that many men are not pursuing outdated stereotypes, but rather security, self-respect, and the opportunity to create meaningful lives. At present, some say they do not feel fully acknowledged or understood. If the DNC intends to restore confidence, it may need to move beyond surface messaging or symbolic outreach. A broader reassessment of priorities, clearer communication, and engagement with practical issues could be necessary. Without that shift, the skepticism reflected in moments like this could deepen into broader political consequences.
I do give a shit who wins the next election. And outdated racial pandering is one reason Democrats lose elections. When Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi put on kente cloth, I don't think it earned them one vote for their powerful emotional ties to Ghana. Here in California, we're now segregating kidnapping. Really. California doesn't just have Amber Alerts for missing children. We have Ebony Alerts for Black children and Feather Alerts for Native American kids. What is that?
Democrats experienced more than a decline among male voters. They also saw reduced support within several key racial constituencies, including segments of Black and Latino communities. The changes were not large enough to dramatically redraw the electoral map, but they were notable for what they suggested. They indicated that Trump and his allies managed to gain measurable traction in areas where Democratic backing had previously been more consistent, prompting concern across the spectrum. Some observers contend that these shifts reflect frustration with messaging perceived as overly polished or detached from daily life. Many voters appear to prioritize economic strain, public safety, and pathways to opportunity over strictly identity-focused appeals. When communication feels symbolic instead of solution-oriented, its effectiveness can diminish. At its foundation, politics revolves around credibility and tangible outcomes. Even modest changes in voting patterns can point to broader unease developing beneath the surface, unease that, if left unaddressed, may gradually expand into a more substantial political challenge.
Look, even if you like identity politics, this kind of thing is antiquated. From 2010 to 2020, the number of people identifying as multiracial in America went up 276%. 1 in 5 newlyweds now are in an interracial marriage, and that number goes up to 100% in ads for Subaru. You couldn't do a remake of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner today because almost 100% of Americans approve of interracial marriage, especially with rich in-laws. And 95% of white women would leave their husband to marry Idris Elba.
Maher contends that the DNC's emphasis on identity-focused outreach appears less effective in the current political environment. In his view, many voters are growing more cautious about messaging that centers primarily on group identity without clearly demonstrating measurable results. He suggests that the traditional strategy, addressing specific constituencies with tailored language and symbolic initiatives, no longer assures consistent support at the ballot box. Maher notes that the electorate is changing and communities are not voting as unified blocs in the way strategists once assumed. Economic pressures, cultural developments, and individual priorities are increasingly shaping political choices. Many voters, he argues, are evaluating performance and outcomes more closely than rhetoric alone. From this perspective, reliance on predictable demographic trends is becoming less dependable. Maher frames this as part of a broader shift in American politics, where parties cannot assume long-term loyalty. Instead, they must continually build credibility through transparent communication, practical policy proposals, and results that connect with diverse and evolving communities nationwide.
Who says, as humans, we are obsessed with race, and that obsession can really hinder people's aspirations. Actress Raven-Symoné agrees. She told Oprah, "I'm tired of being labeled. I'm not an African American. I'm an American. She says, I don't know what country in Africa I'm from. My roots are in Louisiana. And you don't have to agree with that. But it's a point of view a lot of people have. It should be respected. Morgan Freeman says the way to finish off racism is stop talking about it. I'm going to stop calling you a white man, and I'm going to ask you to stop calling me a black man. There's even a movement now to ban racial questions on the census, and many of its leaders are people of color, like Professor Sheena Mason, who says to undo racism, we have to undo our belief in race.
For many election cycles, identity-centered messaging played a significant role in Democratic strategy, helping energize voters and maintain stable coalitions. It offered defined narratives, emotional resonance, and a sense of shared political identity. However, its impact now appears to be diminishing. A growing number of voters are questioning whether appeals rooted primarily in identity are leading to noticeable improvements in everyday life. Rather than symbolic acknowledgement, many people say they want practical progress, stronger economic prospects, safer communities, and long-term stability for their families. Voters seem increasingly focused on measurable outcomes rather than carefully crafted language. They're evaluating whether campaign commitments translate into meaningful policy results or remain largely rhetorical. This shift signals changing expectations. Political allegiance is less automatic than it once was. Elected officials are expected to demonstrate effectiveness through concrete action rather than assumed loyalty. As this mindset expands, traditional campaign approaches may carry less weight in influencing electoral decisions and sustaining public confidence.
The liberal group MoveOn.org, formed in 1998 to urge Republicans to move on from the Clinton impeachment. Today's Democrats should move on from identity politics. It's not working. It's not working for them or for us. Democrats are hemorrhaging the very voters they think they're pandering to. The Financial Times writes, Democrats are going backwards faster with voters of color than any other demographic, and suggests the reason is that a less racially divided America is an America where people vote more based on their beliefs than their identity. Exactly. Far-left liberals are living in an old paradigm. Americans don't fit into neat little boxes anymore.
Identity-based politics may now be costing the DNC as much as or more than it helps, as some Americans resist being defined by a single label. Many voters increasingly say they prefer to be recognized as individuals, shaped by their own values, life experiences, and perspectives, rather than grouped primarily by race or background. There is growing pushback against the idea that voting behavior should align automatically with demographic categories. For some, that expectation feels restrictive and dismissive of personal agency. Voters want the opportunity to assess proposals on their substance instead of being guided mainly by identity-centered narratives. They seek engagement rather than assumption. This trend reflects a broader call for authenticity in political discourse, a desire to be treated first as independent thinkers and citizens. As this perspective expands, strategies that rely heavily on identity alone may find it more difficult to maintain the influence they once held nationwide.
Now, you're allowed to be many things all at once, and that's a good thing, even when it's really stupid. Look, we're all Jelly Roll now. We're sloppy, complicated, and contradictory. 2/3 of Republican voters support weed legalization. And 41% of Democrats own or live with someone who owns a gun. Miss Marvel is Pakistani, and the winner of the last 2 NBA dunk contests is white.
Maher references these examples to argue that the United States has changed in meaningful ways over time. In his view, the country is less defined by fixed boundaries or predetermined roles connected to race or background than it once was. He suggests opportunity has become more accessible, giving people from varied circumstances the chance to pursue careers, leadership positions, and personal paths that previously seemed limited. Areas once associated with particular groups are now in many cases open to anyone prepared to compete and contribute. Maher frames this shift as a constructive development. To him, it reflects forward movement rather than decline. He describes it as progress toward long-standing national principles that emphasize evaluating individuals by ability, character, and effort instead of assumptions tied to origin.
In his perspective, expanding opportunity and challenging historic barriers represent a core part of the country's evolving identity and its broader civic aspirations.
You're still building your politics around slicing and dicing people into these fixed categories. Democrats need to get the memo that you can't win elections anymore by automatically assuming you're going to get every voter who's not these guys. The more you obsess over identity, the more you ignore the bread and butter issues that win and lose elections. The real issue is class, not race, and the real gap is the diploma divide, and the real future of the party and maybe democracy depends on
In the end, Maher's message centers less on partisan loyalty and more on what he sees as shifting political dynamics. He cautions that the landscape facing Democrats may be changing, and strategies that worked in prior cycles may not carry the same influence today. Voters are reassessing long-held assumptions and approaching elections with different expectations. Many want to feel acknowledged and understood as individuals rather than categorized as predictable blocks. The concerns he outlines extend beyond party politics and into broader cultural attitudes. They reflect calls for clearer communication, credibility, and leadership that addresses everyday challenges. Issues such as economic security, personal responsibility, and social cohesion are, in his framing, becoming more prominent than symbolic appeals. He argues that if elected officials overlook these priorities, voters will express their dissatisfaction through the electoral process. His central point is straightforward. Political organizations must adjust to evolving expectations or risk losing relevance in a competitive environment that increasingly rewards responsiveness over routine messaging. And that brings us to the end of today's video. If you found it informative, consider subscribing for more balanced political discussions.